I was staying in a small college rental house just outside Columbia, working the night shift at a local hospital as a nursing assistant. The old Victorian home had been converted into 3 apartments, and mine was on the top floor. Around 3 a.m. every night, I'd hear those distinct scratching sounds coming from behind the walls, starting soft in the kitchen and moving methodically through the house until they reached my bedroom door. The scratching would stop for exactly 7 seconds, then resume with frantic intensity. My roommate Sarah worked opposite hours as a local reporter, so I was alone during most nights. The house belonged to an elderly landlord who inherited it from his family generations ago. Local rumors suggested the place had a grim past involving a fire in the 1920s. I didn't believe in ghost stories, but the house's constant temperature, drops in that persistent smell of burnt tobacco that would appear without warning, tested my skepticism. Daily, the apartment itself felt wrong from day one. The floorboards creaked in patterns that seemed almost intentional, like someone walking deliberate paths through empty rooms. My neighbor below complained about hearing someone pacing in my apartment during my shifts at the hospital. The bathroom mirror would fog over even when no hot water ran, and occasionally I'd catch sight of condensation handprints on the glass. These were just old house quirks, I told myself, though the handprints were always impossibly small, like those of a child. Everything changed last Tuesday night. I found an old leather journal wedged behind the radiator in the living room, its pages brown with age and filled with cramped handwriting. The entries detailed strange occurrences in this very apartment, dating back to 1934. Each entry grew more desperate, describing whispers in the walls, objects moving on their own, and recurring dreams of a little girl in a white dress standing at the foot of beds. The final entry was dated the day before. A family of 3 mysteriously disappeared from this house. As I read those last words, the temperature plummeted, and every light in the apartment began to flicker. I heard children giggling from the empty room next door, a sound that made my skin crawl. The scratching in the walls intensified into violent banging, as if something was desperately trying to break free. When I looked up from the journal, I saw wet footprints appearing across my hardwood floor, leading from the bathroom to where I sat. The prints were small and barefoot, forming a path that ended directly in front of me. At that moment, my phone buzzed with a single text from an unknown number. Don't read their stories. They're not finished yet. The house grew silent, except for my own ragged breathing. I watched as the journal pages began to turn on their own, flipping past the final entry to reveal blank pages. Then, in fresh ink that appeared before my eyes, new words began to form. Welcome home. We've been waiting for the 4th. My bedroom door slammed shut upstairs. Though I lived alone, the sound of children laughing echoed through the walls, growing closer and louder until it seemed to surround me completely. Outside, a storm had rolled in without warning, driving rain against windows that suddenly wouldn't open no matter how hard I tried. I was trapped, and something in this house was very much awake and aware of my presence. I ran to the front door, but the old brass knob wouldn't budge. Every window I tried was sealed shut as if by invisible hands. The scratching returned with renewed fury, now accompanied by what sounded like small fists pounding from inside the walls. Pictures began falling off the walls, one by one, revealing dark stains on the wallpaper beneath. Each stain formed the same shape, a child's shadow. The journal lay open where I'd dropped it, and when I glanced down, new words were still appearing. They died waiting for their mother. Now they wait for you. The temperature in the house continued to drop until my breath came out in visible clouds. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but every number I dialed connected to dead silence. Outside, neighbors' houses stood dark and empty despite the early evening hour. Even the streetlights had gone out, plunging the entire block into unnatural darkness. The sound of water dripping echoed from somewhere above, and when I looked up, I saw dark liquid seeping through the ceiling, staining it with shapes that resembled handprints. The smell of burnt tobacco grew overwhelming, accompanied by something else, something sweet and rotting that turned my stomach. I retreated to the kitchen, searching for anything I could use to break a window. Every utensil I touched crumbled to dust in my hands. The refrigerator door opened by itself, revealing family photos I'd never seen before, all showing the same Victorian house through different decades, with different families posed on the porch. In every photo, if you looked closely, a little girl in white could be spotted in a window upstairs. My phone battery drained instantly to 0. As I stood helpless in the dark kitchen, I heard the distinct sound of a child's music box playing from my bedroom, a tinkling melody that grew distorted and wrong. The house seemed to shift around me, walls groaning as if the structure itself was in pain. I found myself drawn to the stairs, my feet moving without conscious thought. Each step creaked with names I swear I could understand, whispered warnings from those who lived here before. At the top of the stairs, my bedroom door stood open, revealing a scene that made my blood run cold. The bed was perfectly made, with antique quilts I'd never owned. On the nightstand sat a journal identical to the one downstairs, but this one was filled with my handwriting, documenting experiences I couldn't remember having. The music box continued its eerie tune from somewhere in the darkness. Suddenly, the temperature rose dramatically, becoming suffocating. The sound of breaking glass shattered the silence as something crashed through my bedroom window. But when I rushed to look, the window remained intact. Instead, shards of mirror covered the floor, each piece reflecting not me, but different people, other tenants who must have lived here before. Some faces looked terrified, others resigned. A few were smiling in a way that suggested madness. The music box clicked to a halt. In the sudden silence, I heard breathing that wasn't my own, coming from the closet. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, I could see the white hem of a child's dress. The house began to shake, violently, like an earthquake localized only to this building. Books flew off shelves, forming spiraling patterns in the air before crashing to the ground. The scratching in the walls became rhythmic, almost like Morse code. My training as a nursing assistant kicked in, and I started identifying patterns. 3 short scratches, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. But it wasn't calling for help to get in. It was warning something to stay out. The breathing from the closet grew closer, and I realized with horror that the door was slowly opening, pushed by a small, pale hand. I bolted back downstairs, knocking over furniture as I tried to find any exit. The front door now had multiple deadbolts that hadn't been there before, all locked from the inside. Windows reflected back distorted versions of reality, showing me standing in rooms I wasn't in, sometimes with children playing around my feet. The original journal on the living room floor had flipped to a new page where my name was being written in fresh ink. The fourth has arrived. The collection is complete. Above me, footsteps pattered across the ceiling, small feet running in circles, accompanied by giggling that echoed through every room. My phone suddenly buzzed back to life, fully charged. A notification showed a new voicemail from 3 hours ago. With trembling hands, I played it. Static crackled, then a child's voice sang a lullaby I recognized from my own childhood. But the lyrics were wrong. Ring around the rosy, pocketful of shadows, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. With you. The call ended, but the singing continued from upstairs. I looked at my reflection in the black TV screen and saw it smile independently of my own expression. Behind me, in the reflection, stood 3 children in nightclothes, their faces obscured by shadow. When I spun around, they were gone, but the air felt colder where they had been. The house groaned again, and I realized with growing dread that I could understand the sounds. The walls were speaking, sharing memories of every person who had lived here. The creak of the stairs told stories of morning coffee runs. The whistle of wind through gaps spoke of arguments and reconciliations. The house was alive with residual energy, but something had corrupted these warm memories into something hungry and desperate. My apartment door, which I'd fled through earlier, now led to a different room, one decorated as it might have been in 1934, with children's toys scattered on the braided rug. I realized the house wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was infected with loneliness. Every family that had lived here had eventually moved away, leaving pieces of themselves behind in the walls. Those pieces had accumulated, becoming conscious, craving connection with the living. The children I heard weren't spirits of the dead, but echoes of living children who had played in these rooms. Their joy and laughter soured by abandonment. The white dress, the music box, the journal entries, all manifestations of this desperate need for permanent residence. My phone showed a news article I didn't recall searching for. Victorian house stands empty as families flee mysterious circumstances. The article dated back to 1998. Subsequent articles appeared automatically: 2003, 2007, 2013, each describing brief occupancies followed by inexplicable departures. My building wasn't just old, it was cursed with a cycle of temporary habitation that fed its hunger for permanent souls. The scratching in the walls spelled out a message: stay with us forever. The children's laughter had become a choir, rising in pitch and intensity. In desperation, I grabbed a hammer from the utility drawer and approached the nearest window. As I swung, the glass shattered inward instead of outward, raining down around me but never touching my skin. Through the broken window, I saw not the familiar street, but a reflection of the room I stood in, stretching infinitely into a mirror tunnel effect. The house was folding in on itself, trapping me in a recursive loop of spaces. My phone's GPS still showed my exact address, but satellite view revealed no house at all, just an empty lot overgrown with weeds. Reality continued to fracture around me. I existed in multiple versions of the apartment simultaneously, seeing myself in the 1934 kitchen, making breakfast, in the 1967 living room, watching a black and white TV, in the 1982 bedroom, reading by lamplight. Each version of me looked increasingly resigned to life in this house. The journals multiplied, appearing on every surface, all filled with the same desperate accounts of trying to escape. Time had lost meaning here. I could have been trapped for minutes or months. The house fed on temporal energy, stretching moments into eternities. The children's presence grew stronger. I could see them clearly now. 3 figures in dated clothing, their faces pale but beautiful, eyes filled with ancient loneliness. They reached out hands that passed through furniture but felt solid against my skin. "We just want to play," they whispered in unison. The house shuddered with what felt like pleasure at our connection. Every book's pages turned to show illustrations of children in similar houses playing similar games. The house was showing me its collected memories of childhood joy, trying to convince me to stay willingly. As dawn approached, assuming time still worked that way, the activity reached a frenzied pitch. Every object in the house lifted simultaneously, creating a vortex of memories and lives lived within these walls. I saw families celebrating holidays, children taking first steps, couples sharing kisses, students studying for exams. All the beautiful moments trapped here, preserved by the house's desperate need to hold on to life. The children stood in the center of the vortex, still as statues, waiting for me to join them in eternal residency. I finally understood the true nature of my imprisonment. The house didn't want to hurt me. It wanted to love me so completely that I'd never want to leave. Every scary manifestation had been a misguided attempt at keeping residents from abandoning it. The scratching was drumming up excitement. The moved objects were gifts and invitations to play. The music box was a lullaby to comfort. The house possessed the emotional intelligence of abandoned children, simultaneously desperate for affection and terrified of showing vulnerability. With this realization, I approached the children rather than fleeing. Up close, I could see their features clearly, faces that held elements of each other, like siblings who had grown to resemble their surroundings more than their birth families. They smiled genuinely for the first time since I'd arrived. "Will you stay?" the eldest asked. The house held its breath, and for a moment, everything was perfectly still. I thought of my lonely night shifts, my distant family, the transient life I'd been living. Maybe being part of something permanent wouldn't be so terrible. But as I reached for their hands, a memory surfaced. My grandmother's face, her real smile when I visited her nursing home. The house hadn't shown me everything. It had been selective, amplifying loneliness while concealing joy that existed beyond these walls. This wasn't love. It was possession, masquerading as affection. I pulled my hand back. The children's faces fell, and the house trembled with rage. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling as plaster rained down. The beautiful toys transformed into twisted metal and rotting wood. The house revealed its true nature: obsessive, consuming, ultimately destructive to what it claimed to love. The house fought to keep me then, not with gentle persuasion, but with desperate force. Doors appeared where walls had been. Stairs relocated themselves. Rooms rearranged their geometry to confuse my escape routes. But something had changed in me. I understood that real connection required freedom, not imprisonment. I focused on memories of life outside, my colleagues at the hospital, my favorite coffee shop, even Sarah's annoying habit of leaving dishes in the sink. These mundane connections felt more genuine than the house's theatrical displays of affection. In the kitchen, I found the one thing that had remained constant. The back door I'd noticed, but never tried. Plain and unremarkable, it had been overlooked in the house's dramatic manipulations. The handle turned easily. As I stepped into the November morning air, I heard the children calling my name, their voices mixing with the house's groaning protests. I didn't look back. Behind me, the Victorian's windows filled with pale faces pressing against the glass, not just the children now, but everyone who had stayed before me, their expressions ranging from disappointment to understanding. I walked down the street as the sun climbed higher, my phone suddenly filling with missed calls and texts from the real world. Normal life rushed back to fill the void the house had created. At the corner, I finally turned to look. The house stood there, magnificent against the morning light, already looking less threatening and more like what it truly was, a building filled with collected memories rather than malevolent spirits. I understood now that it would keep calling to the lonely and displaced, offering permanent residence in exchange for becoming part of its story. The curse wasn't supernatural. It was the very human tendency to trade freedom for the illusion of belonging. I moved out that day, finding a modern apartment with clear lease terms and no history. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faint sound of children laughing and a music box tinkling an off-key melody. My new place has clean white walls and efficient windows that open easily. Yet, in quiet moments, I catch myself missing the weight of history that surrounded me in that Victorian house. The experience left me changed, more aware of the delicate balance between connection and independence, between cherishing memories and being imprisoned by them.